Dear friends and partners, a warm welcome from the European Movement office here in Brussels on a hot summer's day. We have come together to discuss one of the most important questions of our time. Since Russia decided to unjustifiably invade Ukraine and wage a brutal war against an independent democratic nation, the EU and Europe as a whole has been handling one of the greatest challenges of our time. We have seen a lot of activity, a lot of solidarity, and a lot of close cooperation between the European Union, international partners, and Ukraine. And for that reason, we have assembled a panel of key high-level decision makers that have been in the thick of it in this process of addressing this challenge that we're all facing. So I would like to welcome to today's discussion first His Excellency Matti Maasikas, EU Ambassador and Head of the EU Delegation in Kiev. Matti, thank you very much for joining us. Also from Kiev, we have Ivanna Klympush-Tsintsadze. She's a member of Ukraine's parliament, and she's also the chair of the Parliamentary Committee on Ukraine's integration in the EU. And last but not least, from here in Brussels, we have His Excellency Arnoldas, Pranckevičius, who is a permanent representative of Lithuania to the European Union. Arnoldas, thank you very much for coming too. If I may, Matti, I'd like to start with you. From your vantage point in Kiev, you have been at the forefront of the European Union's efforts to assist Ukraine and rebuff Russia's aggression. Could you give us a short overview of what the European Union is doing and how we are helping practically our partners in Ukraine?
Thank you very much, Petros, and warm greetings from my side to the audience as well. 2 weeks ago, 1st of July, I was privileged to attend one of the most moving moments in my professional life, when to the plenary hall of the Ukrainian parliament, a giant EU flag was brought. It's the second time that a flag has been brought to this hall. The first one was in 1991, when the Ukrainian flag, national flag, was brought in. It is fair to say that the EU at the moment symbolizes hope for Ukraine and Ukrainians. The European Union membership is a destination and a destiny that the Ukrainian nation has chosen to itself, and they are pursuing it in a very consistent way. The EU is seen as delivering on its promises and on Ukrainian expectations throughout this war. On sanctions, first, we all recall these discussions, these pleas by the Ukrainian leadership to introduce sanctions even before the Russian invasion started, and it's no secret that there also some issues have become also of symbolic value, not only practical meaning, but also symbolic value, like de-swifting, that's a new word, de-swifting of Russian banks, or the sanctions reaching the area of energy. This is something that the EU has delivered on. Secondly, in the first ever allocation from the European Peace Facility, which is, despite of its name, meant to support military in partner countries. The first ever allocation late last year for Ukraine was 33 million euro. By now, the EU has decided to allocate 2 billion, and discussions among member states are ongoing in allocating half a billion more. 350 million of humanitarian assistance, 500 million state building contract, a promise of, an emergency macrofinancial assistance of 1.2 billion, a promise of further 9 billion macrofinancial assistance this year, of which 1 billion will be disbursed in July. And most importantly, of course, the candidate status. It is no secret that even on the 24th of February, when the EU leaders gathered to an extraordinary summit, there was not much enthusiasm to discuss Ukraine opening the EU membership perspective for Ukraine. In one of the shrewdest and most dramatic moves that the Ukrainian leadership has been doing, and foreign policy moves, was signing of an application to join the EU by President Zelensky in the 5th day of the war. Now, 4 months later, Ukraine is an EU candidate country with clear membership perspective, and also with a clear roadmap how to move forward. This, all in all, is very substantive assistance that the EU has been doing, is doing, and will be doing.
You pointed out the speed and the energy with which the European Union has reacted, but also how consolidated that response is among the different member states and among the institutions. And I think that particular element, the fact that the European Union is moving forward in unison, is quite important in itself. Ivanna, if I may come to you now, first of all, I'd like to ask, how are you doing? How are things in Kiev, but also across the country? How are you dealing with the invasion? And then secondly, perhaps, how are you viewing the role that the European Union has been playing in its effort to support Ukraine, and of course, the efforts that you are making to craft a path towards EU membership?
Thank you, Petros. Thank you for invitation. Hello to everybody who is listening in. Well, as we speak here, and Matti probably can support and prove this, there is an air alert ongoing in Kyiv. So that's yet again, once again, the reminder that unfortunately there is no safe place, and the whole country continues to be on alert. The whole country continues to be under pressure. The bombardments, the rockets are still pouring on the Ukrainian cities. We are continuing to have human civilian losses, destruction of our infrastructure, destruction of our apartment buildings, of hospitals, schools, kindergartens, cultural sites, and so on. And that just proves that Russia has not given up on its idea to erase us from the map of the world, and continues to carry out its barbaric attack on Ukrainian people, also attacking the Ukrainian citizens on the occupied territories, forcefully deporting them, and thus continuing the acts of not only of war crimes and crimes against humanity across the country, but also acts of genocide on the top of the act of aggression. And that is in this continued situation. Obviously, our humanitarian, financial, military needs are unfortunately not diminishing. They are growing, and that leads me to thanking the EU for the mobilization of support that has been done up till this point, and this common, unified, strong response to this brutal, unprovoked attack in the 21st century but also leads me to the issue that has to be, I think, very sincerely and honestly addressed: how to sustain this support, how to ensure that, notwithstanding the economic difficulties, raising inflation rates across European continent, across European Union, energy prices and energy crisis that is looming, and that is probably going to be the real issue in the nearest month. How to ensure that the societal support that has been, from my perspective, really driving a lot of the efforts of politicians recently is still as strong as it has been in the first months of this brutal aggression. We appreciate that really the EU has been able to unite and to ensure this common response to the Russian Federation. I think this is something that neither Russian Federation has expected. I think even Ukrainian people were not expecting, but I think also the EU itself did not expect it of itself, that there will be such a possibility to mobilize. So on the top of the financial aid that we are receiving, on the top of the sanctions that have been already introduced towards Russian Federation, humanitarian aid that we are receiving, military aid, both on the level of the EU, but also on the level of the national states, it is very, really historic moment that has happened that Matti has referred to, this candidacy status that was granted to Ukraine. I appreciate efforts of every single person who has engaged in this effort, and we know that even probably a week before the decision was announced and made formal, we still had some hesitating countries, and we know how hard we all worked in order to get this ray of light at the end of the tunnel for Ukrainian people. Because for us, it's a possibility to know that after the end of this war, and we hope to win this war together with your backing, there is a possibility to transform the country in accordance to the best practices and bring people, Ukrainian people, to that stage of development of the country when all the rights and freedoms will be respected, when we will ensure that there is rule of law in the country, when we will ensure that there is also economic freedom and prosperity for the people, and possibility for each of the Ukrainian citizens to realize their dreams. So we are grateful for this move, but I also expect that this candidacy status not only is to mobilize Ukrainian political elites, civil society, executive, legislative branches of power, but also will mobilize further the EU. It's not time to get tired. It's not time to relax and lay on laurels. It is time to work together, because we need your oversight, we need your engagement, we need your advice, and we need also the EU to work on the institutional capacity to now work with the candidate country, Ukraine, in order for us to be able to work on the conditions that had been set forward in order for us to be ready to open the negotiations on the accession, but also render all the expertise that is available across the European Union in order for us to quickly move on this path.
Indeed. I'm sure both Arnoldas and Matti will attest the enlargement of the European Union has transformative effects, both for the candidate countries, but also for the European Union itself, which has changed for the better after welcoming countries like Lithuania and Estonia, Matti's motherland. Arnoldas, there's already been discussion about the Council's decision to grant candidate status to Ukraine, and I would be curious to hear also your first-hand experience of that journey that we took from February to events in the last couple of weeks, but also to ask you, how is the Council dealing with some of the challenges that we are facing? I mean, there is a meeting of ambassadors taking place today, and there are various issues on the table: energy, food security, further support for Ukraine. diplomatic efforts. I'd be interested to hear your assessment a little bit on current developments.
Thank you, Petros, and it's a great pleasure to join this panel. Indeed, as you have said, Matti and myself are coming from the Baltic region, and all three Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, are perhaps, well, indeed the only countries that belonged or were occupied by the Soviet Union and made the full transition, full journey to the European Union and to free market, liberal system, and of course NATO alliance. Indeed, I think what has happened with Ukraine and the victory regarding candidate status is historic by all accounts. And I think Ukraine will hopefully also, together with Moldova and Georgia, one day join our trio in doing that full transformation, in really making sure that the very clear will of the people of Ukraine and in Moldova and in Georgia to be in the European Union, to be European in the way of democratic rule of law and human rights credentials will become successful. And it is our mutual job to make sure that it happens. You're right to say that the world in January and the world today is a completely different world. And all of us who have worked with Ukraine's European aspirations for many years, and with Ivanna, we know each other for many, many years as well. For us, all of that is indeed rather incredible to see how quickly Ukraine managed to prepare the questionnaire, the answers to the questionnaire, and how quickly the process has happened, and that we managed also to, here in the Council, gather the 27 countries' unanimous support for this historic decision. The decision which not only is important for Ukraine, but also is very important for the European Union, because after many years of stalemate, it brings back energy into the policy of enlargement, which in my mind is the most powerful foreign policy tool that the European Union possesses. It also is an icebreaker. Ukraine is an icebreaker not only for Moldova and Georgia, but also for Western Balkans. And it gives a new pressure, constructive, positive pressure on the problems that we still have in the Western Balkan regions, and hopefully will soon also manage the stalemate that we have regarding the start of the accession talks with Albania and North Macedonia. So in many ways, it's a transformational period for enlargement policy, for the European Union as a geopolitical player. And for Ukraine, the candidate status is not just a symbolic issue. It is, in my mind, a tool to link the European reforms and European path to the long-term reconstruction, which will take many years, which will, of course, be very substantial financially, but which immediately should already be linked to the future, to the transformation of the country into a completely different place in terms of a modern, democratic, reformed Ukraine. But for that, of course, we have to make sure that Ukraine successfully defeats Russia and does not allow President Putin to claim victory in Ukraine. And for that, we cannot tie it down. We have managed to keep the 27 unity here in the Council. We should keep it as our biggest and most important weapon and tool. Therefore, we should increase the military spending. On Monday, the Foreign Affairs Council will meet again and we'll be discussing the fifth tranche of the support for Ukraine via the European Peace Facility. And we hope that we will manage to agree on that decision and continue financing extremely important military support for Ukraine. Secondly, financial support is no less important. Yesterday in the ECOFIN Council, the finance ministers agreed to grant Ukraine 1 billion euro macro-financial assistance, but we cannot stop there. We expect a decision on the rest 8 billion as soon as possible, as was already endorsed politically by the European Council in June. Finally, of course, on sanctions, support for Ukraine is one issue. Another issue is continuously putting pressure on Russia, on Russia's regime. And with the 6 subsequent sanctions packages, we have already achieved a lot, and they are indeed rather heavy and very significant. And we should not underestimate the effect and the importance of those sanctions on Russia. But we cannot stop here. And therefore, I'm happy that this week we will start again discussions here in the Council on the next package of sanctions on Russia, which will include different new sectors as well as individuals and companies. So a lot of decisions are still ahead of us. And as I said in the beginning, the most important thing is really not to allow ourselves to give in, to tire, to stop. We have to have a lot of patience and a lot of determination. It is a long-term battle, not only for Ukraine's survival, but I would say, of course, for Europe's own survival and its own credibility.
Yeah. I mean, if I have a question actually that applies to all of you, but I'll start with you, Matti, because Russia's invasion has radically altered the geostrategic context in our continent. It's not just the fact that we are witnessing an actual war again on European soil, where a sovereign, independent country is being invaded, but it's also because it is forcing us in many ways on the European Union side to consider the role the EU can play geostrategically. Do you think, firstly, that the warnings that several member states have been making over the past years and decades with regards to the role of Russia have been confirmed correct? And again, I think both Lithuania and Estonia had led that debate. And considering all that, are we to expect the emergence of a more geostrategic European Union, one that can play a stronger role in security and defense in our continent? Matti, and then I'll go to the rest.
Thanks a lot for this, Petros. Yes, you're absolutely right. The warnings that were there for 20 years were largely ignored of the danger stemming from an ever more autocratic Russia and imperialistic Russia. But since the most useless interventions in diplomacy and politics start with "I told you so," I will leave the historic part aside and go to the present and the future as much as possible. Many wondered, I put it diplomatically, when the current Commission, European Commission, took office and took the title of a geopolitical commission, because the EU has not been good at geopolitics for a very simple reason. Geopolitics is mostly about history and geography, and the EU does not discuss history of very easily understandable reasons. The 27 countries that are at the table have so much history between them that if they started discussing that would be history would be the only subject. Now, Russia's full-scale invasion against Ukraine forced the EU to the geopolitical path for real. And I will not go into "told you so," but you see also how the politicians that throughout the years have pushed the rhetorics of there is no military solution, or the most important thing is a ceasefire. The same politicians, the EU leaders and the EU member states leaders, now state clearly that we want Ukraine to win this war. We are helping Ukraine to win this war, And just a ceasefire, just a peace at any cost is not acceptable, because the violation of the international order in Europe is so great. The last time the borders of the borders of the EU in terms of granting membership perspective were expanded is the first time for 19 years. Last time was, if you will, a generation ago in Thessaloniki, opening the perspective for the Western Balkan countries. If that's not geopolitical, then what is? And the EU is a very how should I put it? Is a very consistent animal in terms of if a promise has been given, if a door has been opened, it will not be taken back. It will not. This door will not be closed. So already all the mechanisms that apply for working with enlargement countries have started to work with Ukraine. Now, first step being on the Ukraine's delivery on the recommendations for the next steps. So the EU is a very consistent and systematic animal, and now this process has started. So I am optimistic. I am hopeful of this geopolitical nature of our institutions, of our union at our time being consistent.
Yeah. And also, we shouldn't forget that Putin has actually threatened members of the European Union with military action, not least Estonia, but also Finland and others, which I think definitely puts your intervention in sharp perspective. Ivanna, you are the front line of this new geopolitical, geostrategic order that Russia's invasion has ushered, and you are also you have the scars to show the effect of Russia's aggression and the destabilizing role that can have on European security and peace. How do you think Europe, the EU, should respond to this beyond what is already doing, and especially with this debate between diplomacy and resistance? Should their priority be to ensure that indeed Ukraine wins this war before anything else?
Well, first, let me try to a little bit disagree with Matti, because it's not about I told you so. It's about lessons learned. And I think that a real serious work about lessons learned and inaction and appeasement that has been happening over decades really have to be, this work has to be done. And the conclusions of that work have to be also very clear, because we can feel that there are still some of the political circles, business circles that are still hopeful that there is a possibility to somehow get Ukraine to compromise and then get back to business as usual with Russian Federation. Obviously, this is not a major trend at this particular moment, but I see what is happening in the media, and I see that those voices are again getting some ground. And I think that this is our common responsibility to ensure that we are finally soberly assessing the situation and we are finally clearly seeing the future. I do think that it's important that the European Union has decided to finally really seriously put a hat of geopolitical and geostrategic player on itself. And I think that from further actions of the EU, it will really depend how strong of a player it will be in the future. And I think the interest of the EU is to be a strong and persuasive player in the future. And I agree that this step of opening up the doors for Ukraine and Moldova and giving us the candidate status, opening the European perspective for Georgia, these are very, very serious steps. But I also think that it is in the interest of the EU, with all the difficulties of the decision making and probably some of the internal discussion and some of the internal fine-tuning of procedures that would have to be taken. It is in the interest to ensure that Western Balkan countries and Georgia, for that matter, as aspiring country, would also have this possibility to anchor their future within the European project. It will only make all of us stronger together, and it will also address the issue of not only economic union, but also the European project as a project of peace and security, as it was also at the very beginning of its functioning. So I think that requires a little additional work. With regard to the prospects that and the resolve for Ukraine to win, I think there is slowly happening this shift, not only that Russia cannot win this war, but that Russia has to be defeated in this war. And these are totally two different narratives. And I think that there is still too little intellectual effort being put to understanding what kind of Russia will we have to deal with after Russia is defeated, isolated, weakened, and punished. And I think all of these components of this of the future have to be really seriously addressed all together. And the EU is a serious role to play in this road, on this road. But we still have to be. I think there is still some fear that there is no understanding how to deal with the nuclear Russia that might be even dissolved into pieces. But that reminds me of the whole discussion that we had before the breaking up of the Soviet Union, when Bush Sr. has come to Kyiv 2 weeks before we announced our independence and addressed the Parliament of Ukraine with words that we should not even dare of thinking of our independence. So we have to ensure that we are not making those mistakes right now, and have to understand that Russia as an empire and as a this crazy oil gas station, as one of the American congressmen has called it once, has to be defeated, and the resolve has to be there for all the countries of the European Union. But that unity, there is a hard work to preserve that unity. And I think also we've seen that there are some frictions to that unity as the sixth package of sanctions has been discussed. And I think that has to be addressed during this discussion that is upcoming, as Arnoldas has mentioned, on the seventh package, which probably and hopefully will close some of the loopholes that are being used by the Russian Federation, but also will introduce additional pressure on Russian Federation in order for it to be further weakened and not be capable to carry out this barbaric war. Because Russia, unfortunately, has enormous human resources, and we have to understand that. It doesn't count human resources. It doesn't care about human life. Has a lot of military capacity, even though it might be old, it might be from the 20th century, but it's still the quantity that they are using, maybe not that much of a quality that is destroying our land and our lives and our future at this moment. So therefore, all of this we have to take into consideration and refresh our common efforts to deal with this.
Indeed, and I think that's something we are all agreeing on. Arnoldas, on this point, on the on the role of the EU as a geopolitical, geostrategic player. What is the debate in the Council among member states? Have events over the last 4 months sharpened the focus a little bit in equipping the EU with the ability to act as a security as well as military actor within our continent and beyond?
No, clearly, the fact that EU has dedicated 2.5 billion euros for European Peace Facility through the military assistance to Ukraine is already a fact of EU entering into a completely different level in terms of geostrategic player. Clearly, the fact of candidate status decisions and European perspective decisions also brings it into a new level. At the same time, I would say the whole sanction methodology and all of those packages have been the most substantial in history of the European Union. And it did take a lot of guts. It did take a lot of negotiation. It was not easy. Ivanna rightly said that we had, a lot of, efforts to put in to have the 6th package adopted, including the oil embargo. But with every single decision, in my mind, the EU has matured as a player, matured as a power, matured as a community of democratic values. It is a test for us as well, a very big test, whether we will manage in history books to be seen as the union that has responded in a correct way to the call of history, and whether we have managed to keep not only our unity, but also our integrity together. But of course, as I said, it all will depend how much we will be able to keep this discipline that we have managed until now in the future. Clearly, Russia will start and already is starting to split us, to divide us, to sow mistrust, to of course employ a very powerful tool of disinformation, which unfortunately Russia does extremely well. And therefore also very important that we put in the sanction list all of those Russian disinformation channels and the tools that it has at its disposal. And here, I think where the European Union will be tested also globally is in the food security crisis, where naturally, there's a lot of expectation from the European Union, from the United Nations to find a solution to help get Ukrainian grain out to the global destinations, and at the same time help Ukrainians secure the Black Sea ports and make sure that their defense positions are intact. And here, unfortunately, Russia has been extremely successful in influencing the global narrative in Africa, in Asia, Latin America, and elsewhere, in trying to blame the European Union and its sanctions, in trying to put the facts wrong. And here we have to be much more strong and much more outspoken in not only in debunking and in fact-checking, but also in pushing forward the narrative and to be much more forceful in telling the true story about Russia's brutal war in Ukraine, about brutal war crimes and accountability. And that's perhaps a second question where, again, we will be tested as an international community, whether we will be able to have the global opinion together and intact when we start the question of international accountability of the Russian regime, and when we discuss the questions of the special tribunal to investigate the crimes of aggression, but also the role of ICC in terms of investigating the crimes against humanity and the war crimes. This will be a test for the global community, and we have to work very, very hard now with all the partners around the globe to make sure, as Ivanna very rightly said, that Russia is isolated and punished, the Russian regime, for the crimes that it has committed.
Matti, on that point, on the question on future relations with Russia, what do you think should the EU's stance be?
It's exactly as Ivanna said. On the EU's or any Western partners' positions, there are two parts. One is how to help Ukraine and how to help Ukraine win, because this is our stated aim. And the other one, then logically stemming from that, is what will happen with Russia. And on that one, some things still take time. And it is my understanding that discussions on West's, and in particular EU's future relations with Russia, these discussions are by far not yet getting to any practical conclusive phase. And it is my clear sort of reading of this field, or of this discussion, that it is not conducive to hold these discussions in the public at this stage. As we have seen some statements of some individual politicians, also individual leaders. It's a very complex global foreign policy issue that cannot be discussed with one-liners. But it's only the one-liners, it's only the headlines that grab the attention. And here it is awfully easy to fall on some old cliches like who must not be treated in what way, and we still need Russia, etc. So I'm following this with great concern. This whole discussion, it is very important to get right, but I don't have the feeling that these discussions are ripe yet. Most of the focus is on helping Ukraine win the war.
Indeed, and perhaps I think that atmosphere in Brussels might also lead to a strategic shift, but also change in leadership, perhaps, because I think it is imperative that the way the EU takes decisions also enables more voices to be heard. Ivanna, Arnoldas actually mentioned the communications war that has been taking place, and the European Union itself has been assaulted over a long period of time from Russian state and non-state actors. But especially in the context of the war in Ukraine, there is a lot of effort for disinformation. How is the Ukrainian government, the Ukrainian state, dealing with that aspect, that side of the war, and how are you trying to indeed win the communications war as well?
Yes, thank you. That leads me to also some of the reflections. Back in 2017, I remember when the Ukrainian government was closing the Russian social networks here in Ukraine, Odnoklassniki and Vkontakte, and I remember how much of a fuss it got among all those people who were concerned with the freedom of speech. And it took us a while to explain that, well, basically it's not about freedom of speech, it's about national security issues and the impact that those social networks have had on our society was really drastic. And that took us some learning curve here in Ukraine, but also some of the experiences that have later been built upon by the EU countries, but also transatlantically. And we've seen the Russian impact across the world using disinformation channels and this propaganda machinery, and also some of the bribing machinery in order to reach their goals. I am happy that we are much more adequately all together assessing right now this front of war, because this is yet another front of war, and Ukraine has been on the forefront of it. and that there have been already serious efforts and serious actions in order to block the Russian, clearly propagandist channels across the EU. But there is also more to be done. Working with satellite communications networks, working with closing further the Russian influence on the societies, that definitely is not useful and is not providing any truthful information. With regard to how we are dealing with this, obviously Russians have not been giving up their efforts to get their narrative through in Ukraine. We, from my perspective, we're a little bit at this particular moment going on the thin ice. I think the Ukrainian government has made incredibly successful efforts in terms of communication, in terms of communicating our cause, our problems, our challenges, the threats that we are facing to the whole world. And I absolutely cherish this efforts, and here a lot has been positively done. But also why I'm saying that we are walking the thin ice right now here, because there is a fine line between the national security issues and that are important during the war, and some of the military self-censoring, if you wish, is very important also during the wartime. But it's important to ensure that this does not go and cross over the line when this needed restraint is going to a political restraint. And I think this is very important for the country that is fighting for democratic values, that has been known as a country that is carrying out, that is greatly respecting the freedoms, and that people of which have been coming out not once over the last 30 years to taking it to the streets to protect their freedoms. So it's important that the unity that right now is of extreme importance for the Ukrainian state to survive and to further carry out our common efforts against the aggressor. The unity can be preserved if there is freedom. That's from my perspective. And this freedom is very important to ensure. So I think we are, as a state, also standing in front of the right now challenge, how to ensure that this balance between freedoms and security is not violated to the extent that it would weaken us as a society that is so capably shown the unity and resolve and courage to unite against aggression.
Indeed, that's very important indeed. And again, it goes to the heart of the matter, because the Ukrainian people have chosen a path towards the European Union and the values it represents, and we shouldn't allow what's happening to get in the way of that path. Arnoldas, after the invasion, we conducted some polling here at the European Movement to assess public opinion in a collection of key countries, both with regards to Ukraine, but also the actions that the European Union has undertaken. And we have seen quite a lot of differences, where, for example, in Hungary, there is very little support for what the EU is doing, and there seems to be deep penetration of Russian propaganda. But not just that, even countries like Greece, we've seen that the public is influenced perhaps by that propaganda. How can we, and by we mean the institutions, member states, but also civil society, through our campaigns where we are actively engaging to ensure that there's a positive narrative in support of Ukraine, how can we make sure that we change that perception and counterbalance the really concerted and long-term efforts that the Russian propaganda machine has been doing in various key member states of the European Union?
Well, first of all, I would like to say several good words about the citizens of the European Union. because in my mind, very often they were ahead of decision makers and of the governments and of the parliaments. I think one of the reasons we have been so successful as the European Union in our decisions, in the speed of the decisions, in the reaction, was because it was fully supported by our populations and by the majority of the populations. Yes, you said that, if you compare different countries, you might achieve different results in terms of Eurobarometer, but across the board, the people in the EU have been supporting to great extent Ukraine, have been supporting to great extent also decisions to impose sanctions, also supported the candidate status, and that is also the case in the countries which were member states which were, historically more skeptical towards enlargement as such. So that was really very fascinating to see that Ukraine has managed even to change the minds of some societies that have been traditionally very conservative towards further enlargement and further, talks with the candidate countries. So overall, I'm very optimistic about the people in Europe, and they've been, I think, a source of big inspiration and a very good, often, I would say, reason for some of the governments to be more bold, to be more active, to take decisions which are right decisions to take, to be on the right side of history. But yes, if we look at the long term, we have to be very careful about the role of disinformation in our public opinions and how to counter that, especially as we move into a very difficult period in the fall and the winter with the looming energy crisis. And next week, Vice President Timmermans will present the package on the winter energy situation, how to deal with those subsequent cuts in gas supply by Russia, Russia using the energy policy in a very aggressive way, not for the first time in history, but probably at the biggest extent seen yet. And that also, of course, on the one hand, forces the European Union to do the right thing, to move away from fossil fuels, to accelerate the renewables and the Green Deal, but at the same time to make some very painful decisions in the short term in order to make sure that there is no energy crisis in the coming months. So that naturally can give rise to certain populism, that can give rise to certain radical forces in some parts of Europe that could definitely be a very fertile ground for Russian disinformation. And we as decision makers, both in Brussels and most importantly in the member states, have to be already very proactive in communicating to the citizens what are the reasons for these high energy prices, for the inflation, what is the role of Russia in all of this, and at the same time to communicate the importance of the sanctions that we have imposed, and that the cost that all of us are paying and the sacrifice all of us are doing is for much bigger goal of Ukraine winning the war, but also of Europe securing its own peace and avoiding a much larger scale war on the continent.
We have been focusing a lot on the work the European Union has been doing and the efforts of member states and the institutions. But perhaps it would be interesting to also look at the more global context. How our American partners have been engaging in this conflict, but also the role that other players have played, not least China, with regards to this conflict. Perhaps, Ivanna, I can come to you first. How do you see the partnership with the United States of America and the support that they are bringing? And to what extent do you think other global players like China could be part of the solution, perhaps, rather than the problem?
Well, thank you. We really appreciate that stance and till now working bipartisan support that we have from the United States towards Ukraine. And We understand that without their political, military, economic support, we would not be able to get even to that point where we are today. But I would like to probably underline so that we would understand. Ukraine, approximately every single day, is using and losing in military equipment about $400 million. So that's for the assessment that what we are getting, both from the European institutions, through European Peace Facility, what we have received as a pledge from the United States, and bilaterally from different countries. Unfortunately, more urgently, quality-wise and quantity-wise weapons are needed in order for us to stop Russians and then to be able to counter-attack. And we really are worried that maybe some of the internal discussions in the and political agenda internally in the US might kind of overtake right now this this common support for Ukraine. But I hope that there will be enough wisdom and readiness to follow the cause and to continue this support to Ukraine. With regard to other players, I think a lot can be done by, additionally, and Arnoldas has mentioned some of this issues, additionally also by the EU and by such countries as, for example, Canada, Japan, reaching out to those nations that claim to be democracies, like India or Brazil, that or South Africa, that have not yet joined to the full extent the side of the good, because I believe that this is the war between the world and anti-world, and between good and evil. And here a lot of additional efforts have to be put into these actors that could actually change the equation and not being used by the Russian Federation in order to take advantage of their bilateral relations and ensure that it is kind of avoiding some of the loopholes that are in the sanctions packages that have been introduced by other countries of the free world. With regard to China, I think here we have to understand that the whole psychological and historical approach of China that is rather trying, from my perspective, trying to engage kind of wait and see approach. And it very well understands that the consequences of the results of this war between Russia and not only Ukraine but the free world will have direct impacts on impact on its actions. And so far, we have seen not a proactive support of Russian Federation from China, and I think that this has to be built upon and further kind of explored. How can we ensure that China does not engage in proactive support of its ally, of its partner, Russian Federation? But that again requires a lot of very fine-tuned diplomatic work through those channels that are most efficient for that cause.
Matti, we have seen the US pivot away from Europe over a long period of time, shifting its focus to other regions of the world. In the context of the current conflict, how is the partnership with the United States from the European Union's perspective, both on the ground in Kiev and in Ukraine, but also diplomatically?
Since the information started to be released on Russia's preparations for the invasion already in November last year, this cooperation on this issue, the EU-US cooperation, has been very, very tight. and very good. There are several, not only bilateral but also multilateral fora where we coordinate. From my perspective here in Kiev, is the G7 countries ambassadors group, where the EU obviously forms part. That is very actively coordinating our positions, and it works. It worked well even before the invasion. I think it's fair to say that cooperation and coordinated push by the US and the EU was one of the factors why in the summer of last year a sweeping judicial reform was launched in Ukraine. It is, I don't say there's a competition, of course not, on who helps Ukraine more, but it is positive encouragement week on week to read news that the United States provided $3 billion for macrofinancial assistance to Ukraine, or of another batch of weapons being delivered. Other partners are trying to be worthy as well and to cope as well. So it is it's an excellent cooperation. It's on a fundamentally important, vital issue, where values-based. There are no questions, no ifs and buts, and this horrible war has brought Western partners much closer together than they used to be.
Indeed. Arnoldas, perhaps also in response to what Ivanna raised, what can the EU do to encourage its international partners in Latin America, in Africa, and elsewhere to indeed side with the angels, so to say, and contribute more actively and tangibly towards the effort to defeat the Russian invasion?
It's a good question. I think we have to be not alone in this quest, but together with the United States, with the G7, which of course has been a very important forum in coordinating our response towards Russia's war in Ukraine. I think Matti has very well explained how close and unprecedented indeed has been the cooperation, not only transatlantically but also with other like-minded countries in the world, those who share democratic values. And I think, in our talks and conversations with our partners globally, we should say that indeed, as Ivanna said, it's really a time of definition. The way you react, the way you act at this moment in history will define your character for many decades to come. And that might also define your relationships for many decades to come. And it's very important to show that, to talk about it in a very open way. And for many countries, and for most countries, for all countries, I would say, other than the aggressors, the concepts of territorial integrity and sovereignty are crucial and are holy. And when you see an aggressor state violating the territorial integrity in such a brutal way, and then theoretically, for instance, getting away with it, it's an invitation for everyone to be very worried about their own survival and their own future. It is a major blow to the international world of norms and rules, to the post-Cold War system of international institutions. So it cannot be seen just as Europe's war. It is a war of global consequence for United Nations, for international institutions, for international law, and therefore it has to be a worry not only for the Western world, but for the rest of the world, for the whole world, in fact. In order, I think, to convince our partners to be together, we need to talk. We need to really double our efforts of conversation. We've seen some very successful votes in the United Nations, where indeed a coalition of member states who have condemned Russia or indeed opposed its membership in the Human Rights Council is significant and very, very big. But we have to work with those countries, as Ivanna has said, which are maybe swinging and are neutral or trying to be neutral in this debate. My point is, you cannot be neutral. You cannot be neutral of such a question, not only of war and peace, but a question of fundamental principles that guide United Nations Charter and international law.
As we're approaching to the end of a discussion, perhaps we should also talk about NATO a little bit. It was, in fact, the pretext for Russia's invasion. The sovereign decision, the sovereign desire of Ukraine to join the alliance was used as an excuse by Russia. It would be interesting to hear your response on behalf of the Ukraine's parliament and Ukraine's government. Is this a case of NATO expanding its territory far too close to the Russian border, or is just in fact the decision of a sovereign NATO to pursue a future for its sovereign nation to pursue a future for itself within the alliance of NATO?
One of our major guilts in this war, if one can say so, is that we as Ukrainian people have decided that we want to build our country in accordance to our own will and vision. And that is why we are being punished. And that's why we are being attacked, because Russia believes that its imperial vision of itself has to include Ukrainian territory, and it wants to prove to itself that Ukrainian people as a nation and Ukrainian state do not exist. We see that with the political decision that has been just taken by NATO for Finland and for Sweden, Russia had to swallow this particular move, which means that Russia understands yet again proves that Russia understands the language of unity, of strength, of commonality, and common efforts. And that's why, yet again, we see that unfortunately we today are bearing the consequences of inaction of NATO, of the Bucharest decision of 2008, when there was not enough courage, specifically on behalf of Germany and France, to let Ukraine and Georgia have that NATO membership perspective. I really believe that after the end of this war, on the second day after the end of this war, NATO has to take a political decision of granting Ukraine possibility to join NATO in the same way as it was done for Finland and Sweden. Because I believe that during this particular time, we are already going through the technical re-equipment of modernizing our military with NATO's modern NATO equipment according to NATO standards. And I believe that during the war, there cannot be better time when to change our command and control procedures also in accordance with NATO standards. So that's why I hope that by transformation that should be given to Ukraine as an impetus for which should be given by the candidate status for the EU, Ukraine has to move very quickly in order to meet the political requirements for being eligible to ask for NATO membership. I think that will make us only stronger altogether. And I also think that we do not have to disregard Putin's Putin's words or Putin's ultimatum that he has put forward against NATO back in December of 2021, when he said that he wants to come back to return to borders of 1997. I think that it's exactly stopping Putin right now in Ukraine with the backing of all the international free world and free will and goodwill countries will actually ensure that he will never be able, he and Russia will never be able to even dream of this possibility of attacking the alliance. And unfortunately, we also see that the alliance has been limited in his responses right now towards this attack of Russian Federation. And I think there's more to be done also inside NATO, working with individual member states in order to change the approach that is being used right now by providing Ukraine only non-lethal lethal support on behalf of NATO. I think that tendency has to be broken in the future, in the nearest future.
And that, I think, is a very sober but at the same time inspiring way to perhaps conclude our discussion. And I just need to thank you all, Matti, Arnoldas, and of course Ivanna, for taking time from your very busy schedule. You're really on the front line of some of the most important developments in Europe's history at the moment. So we are grateful for the time you have given us. But before we close, I'd like to invite my colleague Laura Tatarėlytė, who is Executive Director of the European Movement Lithuania, just to give us some of the concluding thoughts to this discussion. Laura, please go ahead.
Thank you, Petros. And firstly, I would like to thank the distinguished speakers for presenting the current situation in such clear words that leave no doubt that the only possible solution to this war and to the Russian aggression is the European solution, which must be united, decisive, and most importantly, value-based. But also from my side, I would like to stress that European solidarity starts not somewhere in Brussels, but firstly, it starts among us, Europeans, and European civil society. So I feel also like it's the responsibility of each European, and especially like us, representatives of European civil society and European pan-European networks, to speak up, to mobilize citizens, to encourage dialogue, and also to push politicians to find the common European solution. So therefore, I very much would like to thank to Petros and to European Movement International for hosting this discussion and to contributing that the Ukrainian question will not, it's very high at our agenda and will not disappear and remains visible. And I think it's also especially important now because, as many of you mentioned today, that we already have this term war fatigue, when many people also in Lithuania are already a bit tired. And also in our international and European networks, we observe that, well, we have a bit less activism, a little bit less enthusiasm for proposed joint initiatives. Also, Enjoy Lithuania say that they have less volunteers, they receive less donations. So on one hand, this is understandable, but still the thing is that especially now we cannot give up, and we cannot allow us to get tired now and just to accept this as a new reality. And of course, we must understand that we'll have to give up some comfort. Maybe we'll have to put our radiators few degrees less this winter, or to have less holidays abroad this season. But this is what the war is, and this is the least what we can do if we want victory. And I would like to stress that I use the word victory and not peace, because, well, that is victory that will bring peace, but also justice. And also I would like to use this podium today and use this opportunity to reach out to other organizations and to all the listeners who are listening to these discussions, and especially to those who represent pro-European organizations, And if you will have any ideas for possible cooperation and joint pan-European actions, or how we can support Ukrainian civil society, so please do not hesitate to contact me, to contact European Movement Lithuania, and maybe we can build a strong contact network and cooperate in the future. So from my side, once again, I would like to thank you all, dear ambassadors, Ms. Klympush-Tsintsadze, Petros, and I wish everyone after the summer to come back with new energy, new inspiration to achieve European victory. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. And indeed, our focus is not going to go away. In fact, tomorrow we are hosting a discussion with the Director General of the European Commission's Department dealing with humanitarian aid about what is the Commission doing to alleviate the suffering caused by Russia's invasion in Ukraine. So please tune in, same social media channels and our website, europeanmovement.eu, for that discussion. And of course, engage with all our work that we are doing on the ground through our various European movements, including the European Movement Lithuania, but also over here in Brussels. The European Movement Network has advocated for peace, conciliation, integration, and against war and conflict since its inception in 1948. And this remains very much at the core of our activities. Thanks again to all our speakers and to all of you for tuning in. See you tomorrow, and please stay in touch. Thank you.